Church. I'm part of the Community Commission, and myself and George Fuller are hosting you this morning at Zoom Hospitality. And we have a wonderful guest this morning, Father Antoni Ucerler, who is a Jesuit priest living at Loyola House and teaching at University of San Francisco. I think actually we won't do any introductions this morning because we're already at 11:12, and we want to get it to hear Father Ucerler as much as possible. So I will just introduce Father Ucerler a bit. He is the director and associate professor at the Ricci Institute for Chinese Western Cultural History at USF. He is born in England and has lived in Japan for over a decade, and has received his PhD from the University of Oxford and taught at Oxford and at Georgetown University, and I think other places as well, and is currently at the University of San Francisco. And I think a fun fact is that he speaks or reads in 12 languages. So we are really looking forward to your talk this morning, Father Ucerler, on Pope Francis's visit to Japan and the relationship between Christianity and Buddhism.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. It's very nice to meet you virtually, but still, I hope this will work. I hope that the PowerPoint I'm going to show will work in a moment. And yeah, I'm a member also of our Japanese province of the Society of Jesus. And one place that I did teach for a long time was also Sophia University, which is our Jesuit university in Tokyo. And I had an opportunity to be there last fall. I actually left today on the 13th of September last year to go to Japan. And I spent about 5 months back in my old home in Tokyo at Sophia. And of course that overlapped with Pope Francis's visit. I've given a couple of talks at St. Ignatius of this kind before. Also, I did one a while back on the history of Christianity. So what I think I want to do for you today is not just talk, blah, blah, blah about Francis did this, Francis did that when he came to Japan. But what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to intermingle it. I'm a historian, and for me, this experience was very personal, but also very meaningful in terms of its sort of historic significance for the Society of Jesus, for the Church in Japan, and also for Japan as a country. So I'm going to kind of weave in and out of historical facts and try to plug a couple of events, not everything Francis did or everywhere he went, to try to give you a better picture of all of this. So I'm going to turn right now my video off and then go to PowerPoint. Let's see whether we can get this up and running properly. Okay, just a second. I'm going to try to share my screen with you. Let's see here, share screen. And then let's see. All right, are you seeing the screen? Okay, the screen is visible. That's great. So here we have this opening page. 23rd to the 26th of November was the visit. You see here a historical map of Nagasaki. So the theme of Pope Francis's visit was protect all life. And of course, this pro-life agenda, particularly in Japan, also had a lot to do with this movement to abolish the death penalty, which is still a big problem in Japan. And there are a lot of people on death row, and executions take place literally, or can take place from 1 hour to the next with no warning. Families are told of the execution after the fact, as are lawyers. So there isn't any of this long US process of, appeals. There are no appeals possible. And so this was one of the themes that Francis chose. Here's Nagasaki Station, already kind of geared up for Christmas time. And here you see the signs, and of course, below Nagasaki in Japanese, it says, welcome, welcome to our city, welcome to Nagasaki. And of course, Nagasaki is a very important place in the history of Christianity in Japan. This is a very nice photograph and a very meaningful one. It's Pope Francis who is greeting our Jesuit provincial, Renzo De Luca. Renzo and I arrived in Japan within 3 days of each other in 1985. We were companions. We studied a language together, and he's now the provincial. He's only 6 months older than me, so we've really known each other since I first went there in 1985 for the last 35 years. What's also very significant is that when I arrived in Japan in September, I actually arrived in September, on September the 12th. So yesterday would have been my 35th anniversary of arriving in Japan. I think Renzo arrived 2 days later, and he was sent there by then Father Bergoglio. He's from Argentina. And so Renzo was sent there by the man who is now Pope. And so this photograph is also really a greeting among old friends. And Renzo was helping the Japanese government and the Japanese Bishops' Conference with this visit. So he was always next to the Pope. Okay, let's go back in time now from 1985 to 1549. This is when Francis Xavier first arrived in Japan on August 15, 1549. And this is the beginning of the history of Christianity in Japan. A couple of decades later, in 1571, you have the opening of the international port of Nagasaki. It was a city that basically became very soon on, from a little fishing village, it became a Christian city. The Jesuits had already been there since the 1560s, but from 1571, Portuguese ships, trade ships, started arriving there directly. And this begins the really long history of Nagasaki as an international port, and it's a place of exchange between Japanese, Portuguese, Spaniards, Italians, Chinese, Koreans. So it truly is one of Japan's most important cities in terms of cultural exchange. So these are, of course, photographs that I took on my recent visit there. A few decades after that, so after Francis Xavier, and then about 9 years after the port opened, because of warfare that was going on, the lord of the area, so the domain, feudal lord of the area, actually donated the city of Nagasaki to the Society of Jesus, which was an extraordinary matter because for 6-7 years, the Society of Jesus basically technically owned the city and was in charge of its administration. This is a document showing that donation written in Spanish, which is in our archives in Rome. The original is in Rome. So another few decades and we have the development of the church in Japan fruitfully advancing, and we have the first martyrdoms. And this is Nishizaka Hill, where you can see this church that's a little bit in Gaudi style by a very famous post-war architect, Mr. Funakoshi. And he designed the church to look like basically the hat of a samurai in the 17th century, but with all these decorations that look like Gaudi because he was inspired by the Spanish artist. And behind this monument to the 26 martyrs, Paul Mickey and companions who died there on the 5th of February, 1597, is our Martyrs Museum. And this place saw not only these martyrdoms, but it also saw many, many other martyrdoms over the following century of persecution. So this is a very special place. It's also, I'm a historian of Christianity in Japan. It's a place where I frequent a lot. So here you see this beautiful also monument to the martyrs, 6 Franciscans, 3 Jesuits, and 17 Japanese lay Christians, including 3 children, all of whom had the choice to abandon their faith or die, and they all chose, including the children who are only 12, 13, 14 years old, they all chose to die as martyrs in this place. This is a 17th century engraving showing this form of Japanese crucifixion where they would then stab them to death, which is the way they died on Nishizaka Hill. So Pope Francis came and prayed at this site. He prayed in front of the relics of Paul Miki, and on this place, here we are in front of the museum and in front of the monument, and this was a truly historic moment for a Jesuit Pope to come and pray where these 3 Jesuits and later other Jesuits also died where in this place where you now have this park and museum and monument. It's a place where countless people died. It was absolutely pouring rain on that day, so we all got very, very wet. This still has the digital mark on it because I haven't ordered the actual photograph from the Vatican yet, but this is me greeting the Pope as we walk into the museum, as he walks into the museum for a short visit. Next to me is Mr. Miyata, the vice director of the museum. And Renzo, of course, again, what's funny is Renzo, the provincial and my companion, was also for 20 years the director of this museum. So, you know, he's showing him around, and here on the right, he's showing him this beautiful scroll of Our Lady, which was used by hidden Christians for worship during the time of the persecution. And he's explaining this to him. Here they're looking at, in this glass case, a letter by Julian Nakaura. Julian Nakaura was a Jesuit priest who died on Nishizaka Hill, but had actually, as a boy, been sent by the Jesuit missionaries to Rome. And so he met 2 popes, Gregory the 13th and Sixtus V in 1583, 1584. And so this was, in 1585, 1584, 1585. And so it was very historic now to see a Jesuit Pope come back to the place where this Jesuit who had been to Rome and had met 2 popes actually died. And his famous last words were, before they put him in this torture of the pit from which he did not emerge, he said, "My name is Julian Nakaura. I'm a priest of the Society of Jesus, and I saw Rome." And those were his last words. And this was in the 1630s. So for Pope Francis to pause and pray in front of this letter that he had written just before he died back to Rome, and that letter came back to Nagasaki, it was very, very meaningful for us. Here I am again with Mr. Miyata, the vice director, and on the left is Father Vitali, who's a Italian missionary, Jesuit missionary, who now runs the museum. Who is the man smiling so happily next to me in the middle of the picture? This is Mr. Tokugawa, Mr. Yehiro Tokugawa. He is the 19th heir of the Tokugawa shoguns. His ancestors were the one who decreed Christianity banned and who persecuted us for 250 years. And I recently had a chance to meet him, and this is a historic sort of friendship and reconciliation between the Tokugawa family and the Jesuits. It's very moving. He came to San Francisco at my invitation. Here we are in Loyola House having dinner. And as you can see, he's sitting there. And he studied in the United States and is a fluent English speaker. And it was truly amazing to have him both in Nagasaki. He came at my invitation, and also in San Francisco. Here he is, believe it or not, at the Wakamatsu Japanese farm north of Placerville near Sacramento. And last year was the 150th anniversary of the founding of this first Japanese colony in America. And in fact, it was founded by the Tokugawa family, who sent colonists to the United States. So we had Mr. Tokugawa come and participate in the festivities there. And the Melissa Loback, who is to his right, is the director of American River Conservancy, who actually organized this event. And the young man at the left is actually Jerry Brown's nephew, who works for American River Conservancy. 1614 is when Mr. Tokugawa's ancestors, and more specifically Tokugawa Ieyasu, started this persecution. And we had a number of huge martyrdoms that followed this, including this famous representation of the martyrdom of 1622, which actually recently we discovered took place on a hill just a 5-minute walk away from where Nishizaka Martyrs Hill is, and where we have our museum. There's another hill just 5 minutes away where a recent sort of geographical surveys looking at the shape of these hills has shown that that is where these Dominicans and Franciscans and Jesuits and many, many lay Christians died. What's significant about it is that you see the different crests on the kimonos of the families, so we can identify from that some of the people who were there. On the bottom right, it shows Father Mateusz de Corus, a Japanese missionary, or a missionary in Japan, I should say, from Portugal, who died at the beginning of this persecution, and who wrote a very important report telling us all about it. This painting survived the persecution because it's in Rome at our church of the Gesù, and it's one of the great treasures there. We have 3 of these martyrdom paintings that were sent from Japan secretly to Rome, and they survived. So we have this persecution from 1614 till 1639, and then basically Japan closes its borders to all foreigners, except a limited group of Dutch traders in Nagasaki and to the Chinese. Otherwise, everyone is expelled. And this begins the long haul of persecution that will go on for over 250 years, when the Christians will go into hiding. And then we jump to the 19th century and to the time of Tokugawa Iemochi. So this is the 14th shogun. So Mr. Yehiro, whose picture you saw, would have been the 19th shogun. Obviously, there is no 19th shogun. There were 15 altogether. And the 14th, this poor young man, he was only 20 years old when he died. He had a whole bunch of problems going on, including the beginning of the revolution against the Tokugawa military government. To make matters worse, in 1853, when he was basically 8 years old, somebody arrives in Japan very unexpectedly, and that man was Commodore Perry. Commodore Perry, Matthew Calbraith Perry, took a warship and arrived in Uraga Bay, just off the capital, Edo, present-day Tokyo, on July the 8th, 1853, and basically demanded that Japan open its ports to trade, commerce, and amity with the United States. This was the beginning of the end of the Tokugawa shogunate as we know it. There was a treaty, the Harris Treaty, that was signed the following year. And by 1865, there was a demand from both the US, the French, the English, the Dutch, and the Russians to also be able to build churches for their own worship. So Christianity was still banned at this time. So in 1865, Bernard Petit-Jean was an MEP, a mission, Paris foreign missions priest, who later became bishop. And this is a photograph of Nagasaki in 1865. He built the first church. It was a French neo-Gothic church for worship by French residents of Nagasaki at that time. And this is a picture of the square in front of it with, you see the church there to the right. And here it is from the front. It's a small church, but something very important happened in that church. Inside, on an important day in our calendar, the 17th of March, so St. Patrick's Day, 1865, this elderly woman, together with another group that you see depicted below in an engraving, walked into this church and asked the priest to explain to them what this building was, and asked 3 questions. Who is your boss, basically? And he started to explain about the Pope in Rome and thinking, well, they won't understand this. And she interrupted him and asked a second question. And where is your wife? And he said, well, you know, it's a custom of the Catholic Church that we priests of this religion do not marry. And then they went over on the right-hand side, and there was a statue of Our Lady. And she said, and who is that? Said, well, we believe that our Lord and Savior was born of this woman, and her name is Mary. And once again, the woman interrupted the priest and said, we are of the same heart. We are of the same faith, which was, of course, absolutely astonishing. So this is depicted here in the park and on this statue, and it commemorates the so-called rediscovery of the hidden Christians. So after 250 years with no priests and no way of having the sacraments except for baptism, the Christians were rediscovered. They were discovered to have survived. And this is one of the most incredible stories in the history of Christianity anywhere, because we have here literally a church that survived and transmitted the faith without any clergy for 250 years. It's an amazing story of survival. And here is the statue of Petit Jean once more. Now, let's jump to Prime Minister Abe, who just recently resigned in Japan, officially welcoming Pope Francis. What was amazing about this meeting with Prime Minister Abe was that he spent practically his entire speech talking about this incident of the rediscovery of the Japanese Christians at Nagasaki. Never has a Japanese politician done something like this in public. It was truly extraordinary. To top it off, as they were speaking, and this was very significant for Japanese Christians, this is the Japanese word kyoko, which literally means imperial teacher. And that is the word with which we translate Pope in Japanese. But until now, they had used the word ho'o, which basically is also like an imperial, not exactly teacher, but someone who presents a teaching. It's a more political term, and Prime Minister Abe chose for the first time to use the term in public that we use to designate the Pope. So not really his title as head of state of Vatican State, but his religious title. Once again, this was extraordinary. Now let's go back to our hidden Christians who are no longer hidden in 1865. 1868 sees the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate and military government and the beginning of the Meiji restoration of imperial government. There's a problem, however. They've discovered that these Christians have survived. So a decree board goes up. This is the way laws were promulgated in Tokugawa, Japan, by decrees written on boards. And I actually have this. This one is part of the Ricci Institute collections. And it says that Christianity continues to be severely and strictly forbidden. So here's a photograph from the 19th century, not of Christians, but of common criminals being arrested. Similarly, Japanese Christians were then immediately arrested again in Nagasaki. More than 3,500 were arrested during this last persecution that lasted from 1868 to 1873. And they were sent into exile for, in inverted commas, re-education, meaning apostasy of the faith, to different parts of Japan. One of them is particularly significant in Eastern Japan. It's Tsuwano, a beautiful, beautiful place where we have a little chapel commemorating the sufferings of these last martyrs who died. Some of them died here, others survived, but they were tortured and forced under very harsh conditions to give up their faith, and they didn't. And it's really another amazing story of Christianity in Japan. And actually, the Society of Jesus is in charge of this little shrine and of the beautiful grounds that commemorates this. So what does Tsuwano have to do with the Golden Gate? Well, in 1860, a few years before those Christians were rediscovered and round up and sent into exile for re-education, the first ship from Japan sailed into the Golden Gate. And this is actually a commemorative plaque at the Legion of Honor that shows that, or commemorates that famous journey. 1871, so during the 10, 11 years later, during that persecution that's going on in Tsuwano, we have the first diplomatic delegation of Japanese to follow up on that 1860 voyage. And during that time, what's very significant is that you have criticism now all over the world beginning because it's come to light that this persecution is taking place. And here we see then the release. This is a picture taken many, many years later of the Tsuwano basically witnesses to the faith who were tortured there for it and who survived. Moriyama Jinzaburo was one of the great leaders, and his brother, a young brother who was a boy, died as a martyr during that persecution. But thanks to knowledge of this, during that delegation, they had to write back to Japan saying they won't receive us because they hear that Christianity is being persecuted. So there is this incredible connection between these martyrs and also San Francisco as the gateway through which this Japanese delegation arrived. Mori Arinori, who became the first Japanese ambassador to the US in 1871, that very year that protests went out, was a remarkable man, and he became the first also education minister when he went back to Japan. He wrote this magnificent Religious Freedom in Japan, a memorial and draft of a charter. He published it by himself with friends in Washington, D.C. in 1872, and he advocated for religious freedom. That religious freedom would only come with the Meiji Constitution in 1889. On February the 11th, 1889, Article 28 gave partial religious freedom as long as it did not interfere with their duties as citizens. Mori Arinori, who had advocated for religious freedom in Washington, was leaving his home to attend this ceremony where this article was going to be promulgated that he had insisted on. And a radical nationalist stabbed him as he was walking out the door, and he died the following morning. So Mori Arinori became the first martyr of religious freedom and of the Meiji Constitution. Another incredible story. So, 1945, of course, we have the Second World War. And on August 6th at 8:15 a.m., this is Father Arupe, our former general, who was a missionary in Japan. And here you see him literally at the novitiate of the Society of Jesus, where he survived, and then later he provided aid to victims of the atom bomb. He said, "We did the only thing that could be done in the presence of such mass slaughter. We fell on our knees and prayed for guidance as we were destitute of all human help." So again, this visit of Pope Francis with, our former general, Pedro Arupe, having been there, having been a witness to this, and having provided also medical treatment at the time, is very significant. And here is Pope Francis praying at the Hiroshima Memorial to those who died of the atom bomb. 3 days later, on August 9th, at 11:02 a.m., here you see a clock that stopped exactly at that hour when the atom bomb exploded. And it exploded right on top of Urakami Cathedral. This is the historic site of the Japanese Christian community going all the way back to the 16th century. So it was very poignant that this bomb mainly destroyed the areas around the cathedral. And here you have some pictures of that. This is ground zero now, which on the right you can see is a piece of that cathedral, original cathedral, that was survived with burn marks on it. I took these pictures in winter. Here you see another couple of statues of the same kind. This is the rebuilt Urakami Cathedral today, and it was rebuilt about 500 yards away from ground zero. And inside the cathedral is a beautiful image of Our Lady. It's from one of the statues, and it's a very strange designation, Our Lady of the Atomic Bomb, because in fact you can see that her face has been charred by the explosion. So this is now inside. Well, Pope Francis, on his way to Japan, was showing this picture of this boy, which is truly amazing. It's called The Fruit of War. It shows what Pope Francis said was, the young boy's sadness is expressed only in his gesture of biting his lips, which are oozing blood. This picture shows a young boy waiting with his dead little brother on his back in front of the crematorium, waiting his turn to have his brother cremated. This picture was taken by an amazing photographer, U.S. Marine photographer Joseph Roger O'Donnell, who died in 2007. And very interestingly, he later went on to become a White House photographer, actually, and he photographed a number of presidents. And it's interesting because he documented what happened in post-war Japan. And actually later on, when he moved to Washington, he became a peace activist. So during his talk at Ground Zero, Pope Francis wanted to show this photograph and talk more about the human side of war. It's not a question, he said, of Japan not having its own blame in the war and all this. It's a question of human suffering and what is truly the fruit of war. Speaking of which, Dr. Takashi Nagai was a radiologist who later died actually of radiation poisoning, but mainly because of his work for people, not so much because of the radiation that he suffered during the atom bomb itself. He wrote the famous book, The Bells of Nagasaki. And in that book, he made a claim that really initially angered the Japanese. He said, at midnight that night, our cathedral suddenly burst into flames and was consumed. At exactly the same time in the imperial palace, His Majesty the Emperor made known his sacred decision to end the war. On August 15th, the imperial rescript which put an end to the fighting was formally promulgated, and the whole world saw the light of peace. August 15th is also the great feast of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. It is significant, I believe, that the Urakami Cathedral was dedicated to her. We must ask, was this convergence of events, the end of war and the celebration of her feast day, merely coincidental, or was it the mysterious providence of God? It was not the American crew, I believe, who chose our suburb. God's providence chose Urakami and carried the bomb right above our homes. Is there not a profound relationship between the annihilation of Nagasaki and the end of the war? Was not Nagasaki the chosen victim, the lamb without blemish, slain as a whole burnt offering on the altar of sacrifice, atoning for the sins of all the nations during World War II? So basically, this is the little room where he died soon thereafter. He said that we can take this suffering and we can also make up for the suffering that we Japanese caused during World War II. And we can do that as Urakami Christians have suffered since the 17th century, then again in the 19th century, and then again in 1945. Basically, he said, all of this has great meaning. It is not worthless. It is not a question of being angry at the US for bombing us. No, it's providential. And through our faith, we've helped others regain their faith and regain meaning in their lives. It was obviously very provocative, but people came around to understanding what he was trying to say. This is the present emperor meeting with Pope Francis. He's the grandson of Emperor Hirohito, who signed that abdication. So you can see how meaningful these connections are. Finally, I have to just say that it was great fun volunteering at the International Press Center and working with journalists, something that I had never done before. And also, of course, greeting Pope Francis when he came and he had community mass followed by breakfast at our community. So he spent an hour and a half with us, which was extraordinary. This is me greeting him at that time. And then he met with our sick, including our second Jesuit general, who recently died and who was a missionary in Japan. As you see here on the left, Father Adolfo Nicolas, who here is already very ill and can no longer speak. Following that visit, he gave a talk at Sophia University. And then what's incredible about all this is that during the Mass in Tokyo, you had many Buddhist priests. This is a Buddhist priest whom I had the pleasure of meeting in Kyoto. And you see Father Jim Blattler with me. If any of you know Father Jim Blattler, who's now at Santa Clara and runs the Manresa Galleries at St. Ignatius in San Francisco, he was with me on this visit when we met so many different Buddhist priests and monks. And again, this desire that they have to really engage with us is something that I find really quite extraordinary. And so, you know, this dialogue, both with lay people, like the Japanese government, as well as with monks and Shinto priests, continues. And so I really think that Christianity has a big future in Japan, and it has such a meaningful presence there. And I think that that's one of the reasons, I could say more, but one of the reasons that Pope Francis's visit was so meaningful. A Jesuit Pope coming to a mission founded by the Society of Jesus with two superior generals who were from the Japanese province, and being able to meet Christians in Japan today and to continue that dialogue. So I'm going to stop here because I've already spoken too long, and I hope that maybe we can then go to some questions. So thank you very much for that. You might have to unmute, otherwise I can't hear you.
Thank you so much, Father Ucerler. That was wonderful to hear you. Really amazing history. And we open the chat now, and to questions. Anyone who has a question, please just unmute yourself and speak up.
Question, Lucy.
Yes, go ahead.
What's the current?
I saw a couple of years ago, I think it was
the underground Catholic
Scorsese movie, The Silence. I just wondered if you have any comments on that based on.
Yeah, I wish I could have talked about that because that was one part I had to cut out of my talk because I just didn't have enough time. I was actually also a consultant for the movie for a number of years. And of course, the movie does not completely address the totality of the reality of the persecution, but it certainly is relatively faithful to the novel that was written by Endo Shusaku. And I think it shows the anguish that they went through. In fact, those scenes where they're trying to torture them in the pit to get them to apostatize, that took place on Nishizaka Hill, where the Pope was, where we have our museum. And so, Julian Nakaura died in the pit at the same time. One of the priests you see in Silence who apostatized on the hill on the same day. So it was very, very dramatic. And of course, I wish I could talk more about this, but it's a very, very dramatic story. And Endo wrote, afterwards, I'll just show you one thing here. Let's see whether I can do this again. Just a second. I am going to share my screen one more time. He wrote this book called it's a play actually, The Golden Country, and El Dorado in Spanish. And in it, he has the interrogator, Inoue, say, "It wasn't by me that you Ferreira were vanquished, but by this mud swamp of Japan. Am I right, or are the Christians right? Is Japan really a golden country in which the seed will grow? Or is it a swamp, as I think, a swamp in which the roots rot and die?" And, I took this image that I didn't show you previously of a rice field, which is very swampy. It's always very humid in Japan. And here is that image of Our Lady in our museum in Nagasaki, which the hidden Christians used. I think that shows that, in fact, the interrogators were wrong. Christianity was not something that simply rotted in the ground. So the story of the martyrs, I think, bear witness to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Oh, hello.
Hello, my name is Jim McLaughlin. I'm here with my wife, Roberta.
Very nice to meet you.
Thank you for your talk. It was fascinating. I have two questions. What is it that helped perpetuate the faith for 250 years? What was it that the people were using? Were there relics? Were there icons? Were there anything written? That's one question. The second question is, could you tell us a little bit about the status of the death penalty in Japan at this time?
Okay.
It's surprising to me that in such a country, a civilized country, that the death penalty is still so prevalent.
Okay, I'm going to now, because I have a virtual background, I'm going to show you an object that's actually in my room, but it's going to look like I'm walking through that wall, which I'm not. So, they use different objects, like you saw that beautiful Mary that was painted in European style on a scroll. but it was actually done at our Nagasaki School of Painting, and there were a whole group of also Jesuits, Japanese Jesuits, who were trained to produce these objects. Another object, and I'm going to have to wiggle this camera so you can see it, is this type. This is something I recently acquired for our collections. This is actually a statue of a Buddhist statue of the Goddess of Mercy holding a child. So Guanyin, or in Japanese, Kannon. And here you see her sitting on top of a lotus, and beneath her is a dragon, or the Chinese dragon. This is one of the statues. I actually acquired this from Japan recently on auction. This is one of the statues that the Christians used. They called it Maria Kannon, Maria, Goddess of Mercy, because it was a Buddhist object that was used secretly to worship. So basically what they did is they used objects like this to pray. They had scrolls, for example, that had all the mysteries of the rosary that had been painted, and you could roll it up and hide it in your roof. They would bring these out for paraliturgies. They would perform baptisms. They would recite the prayers that they had been taught faithfully. They chose older people like yourself to be the leaders of the community. They were lay leaders of the community who were in charge of the baptisms. They were in charge of transmitting the faith, making sure that the prayers were remembered. They were copied, but they tried not to make too many copies because it was dangerous. You could be found. So the oral tradition was something very important. They then also had a ceremony which was similar to the Eucharist using both rice and wine, and it resembled the Mass. And they actually, until recently, they were still performing something of this kind as a commemoration of the Mass. So they found different creative ways in the midst of enormous difficulty to maintain their faith. A word about the death penalty. Well, you know, it's hard to say. There has always been, in many countries, obviously, of course, including the United States, depending also on the state, a sense that justice includes retribution. And of course, the death penalty was something that you had in Japan since the beginning of its history. And so it remained part of the Japanese legal system. And I think what's most difficult to understand, and that's where, you know, there is a huge movement and also a lot of people who are advocating for a more humane system. How and when that's going to come about, I really don't know. But I think that many of the motivations for the death penalty are not dissimilar to those in the US or to any country that still maintains the death penalty. It's this, you know, the right of the state to perform this retribution. But in Japan, it's really strangely draconian because the Minister of Justice signs the death notice, and within hours, the sentence is carried out. So, and it's carried out in secret. You know, perhaps the good thing about, good thing in inverted commas about that is, you know, you don't even have time to worry about the fact that you're going to die because it happens very suddenly, and it's by hanging. But why, you know, lawyers do not have access at that time, why the family is only told afterwards, these are mysteries that are, you know, being debated, and there are very strong factions of lawyers and human rights activists who are doing absolutely everything to stop this. So it's not like, you know, everybody agrees.
I'd just like to say it is noon, but I think that we have several more questions, and I'm wondering, Father Ucerler, if you'd be willing to stay a little bit longer if you have time. If you don't, we understand.
No,
And
no,
if
that's
people
fine.
if people have to leave early because they're going to our Laudate Si circles, you know, thank you for being here now. But if you're willing, thank you. That would be great.
Yeah, if
Let's
there's still a
continue.
question or two, I'd be happy to answer. If I can.
Just a technical question, Lucy. Will this presentation be on our parish website?
Yes, I believe it will. I'm not sure exactly, you know, how quickly that will happen, but it is being recorded by the parish, so I'm sure they're going to find a way to post it.
I'm sorry if
Wonderful.
I can't share my coffee with you, but what can I say?
And
It was wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful.
the answer on the website is definitely yes. I don't know the timing, but it'll be probably a couple of days. But it will-
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Larry. Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
My name is Kathy Holly.
Hello?
And hello, Father. I went to Santa Clara. Did you say that you're at Santa Clara?
No, I said that Father Jim Blattler, who's at Santa Clara, who runs the gallery, he went with me to Japan.
I have to ask you too, did you ever go to China?
Oh yeah, I mean, I run an institute on history of Christianity on China, so.
Well, I just wanted to tell you about 8 years ago, I was in China and I was doing a musical presentation, but I went to Mass at what I thought was a Catholic church in Beijing and a Jesuit priest. And I met after Mass. But since then, I found out that there are lots of so-called Catholic churches that are not really Catholic churches. Now, I don't know, it was a perfect act for me because it seemed like I was at a real Catholic Mass. You know
Well,
anything about that?
yes, this is a very complex problem. What happened was in the 1950s, when the persecution of the church started in China, in order to divide the church, there was an underground church in China, so a little bit like the hidden Christians,
Yes.
and there was an overground church. And in order to divide the church, basically what happened was the government said, well, if you want to continue to worship in any form, you have to register the church with the Chinese Patriotic Association. And so all your priests and bishops have to be approved by the government rather than by Rome. So what happened, to make a very long story short, is that this created a bit of a schism in the church, because you had bishops and priests who were not approved by Rome. Now, ever since, over the last 60, 70 years, there has been a huge attempt to try to find a mode of reconciliation, because a lot of the people who went to Mass, I mean, both underground and also those overground who didn't know any underground church, but they were real Catholics. They wanted to worship. They really believed, but they didn't have any other means to do so. And so the Vatican has been very, very sensitive to this. And over the past 10, 15 years, there has been a steady effort to get those bishops who are illegitimately ordained to be accepted by the Vatican as well.
Ah,
And so the Vatican has basically, now I think with the exception of only one or two, has legitimized the episcopal ordination of practically all of the overground bishops. Tensions still continue because things continue to be difficult. Actually, in the last 2 years, there is a real tightening to the point where even official church, so-called official churches, so overground churches that are accepted by the government, even there, some very zealous officials are tearing down the crosses from the churches.
Oh,
So
really?
the situation has become much, much more difficult, and it's also become controversial. Some people within the Catholic Church too have said that Pope Francis's recent attempts, to come to some sort of an agreement, because there was a historic agreement about 18 months ago of acceptance of the bishops, and that the Vatican would work with China on this. That is not right. It's not the right way to do things. I think that the truth is always somewhere in the middle. And I think that the effort is very important, because the point is, these are real people, these are real Christians, and not unlike the Japanese Christians who, had, nothing but Buddhist statues
Yes.
with which to worship, and yet they found a way to survive. And so it's an ongoing issue. Yeah.
Thank you. And where are you based now? Where is your home?
I am just above the church. I'm at Loyola House on the USF campus.
And you're going to be there for a while?
Yes, I am. I'm here. Not only that, right now we're all stuck here.
Oh,
Yeah, I
true.
mean, we can't go anywhere. But the other day I drove down to Santa Clara for the first time in 6 months. I actually went to see Father James Blattler. I wanted to visit him, and we were able to sit outside and talk a little bit. But going down to the South Bay was like going to China. I mean, that's how far away it seemed.
Well, thank you very much. It's just amazing what you presented today. Had
Well,
no
thank
idea.
you so much. Thank you for your attention. I
Appreciate it,
I
Father.
love doing this sort of talk. So, don't get me started. I can't stop.
Well, do you have anything on YouTube? Do you have other talks on YouTube or anything that are out there?
Yes, I think there are a few. Oh, one thing, actually, I'm going to take this opportunity, and I might get in touch with Lucy about this. We did a film when we did a conference 2 years ago on faith and martyrdom. And we did it in Midland, Ontario in Canada, where the Jesuit martyrs of New France died in the 17th century. And we brought people from China, Japan, Korea, and we compared stories of martyrs and faith. And I made a documentary about that.
Oh,
And the documentary is, I made a professional documentary about it. It's 45 minutes long. And you have interviews there with China specialists, with Korea specialists, Vietnam specialists, and it's on Vimeo. And I could
yes.
make that available to Lucy, and then you could even post it on St. Ignatius website, and people could watch it.
Fabulous.
Could you type it into the chat box so people could see the link?
I still, the reason I won't do that immediately is that we actually licensed it to Salt and Light Catholic Television in Canada, and it was shown on, it's still showing, and I just have to check whether the period, we gave them the exclusive for a couple of months, whether that's already concluded. But I'll make sure, and if I, for any reason, forget, please just continue, you know where I live. So just continue to bug me, and it'd be really nice to be able to show that also, because the Ricci Institute is at USF, and I did an exhibit on the Samurai and the Cross at Manresa Gallery, and it's all linked to USF and St. Ignatius as well.
Great. Thank you, Father.
It would be awesome if we could have a discussion on the documentary at some future AFF hospitality, Lucy.
Oh, I'd love to
Yes.
do that, because then we could
definitely.
talk about martyrs in China, Vietnam, Korea, North America, the North American martyrs. And I wanted to bring all these stories together to see what unites all these people, whether they're in North America or China, Vietnam or Korea. Why do they all decide, to, in terrible circumstances, to give up their lives for the faith? And those are remarkable stories.
Father, thank you so much for this. This is Laurel McCoy,
Hi.
and I came in 15 minutes late on this. I'm interested in two things. First of all, thank you for the explanation of the current Catholic Church in China. I was in Beijing in China on my way to India a couple weeks before the Olympics in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in Shanghai, went to a Catholic cathedral.
Well, yeah, our famous cathedral, which was founded by the Jesuits.
And just 10 steps away was this huge building. It was so hot. I was there in July. I couldn't get in. I had made an appointment and ended up not being able to get in. It was a huge administrative building just steps away from the cathedral. I did attend Mass Sunday morning at the cathedral. It was hugely attended with very organized media in all different languages posted throughout the large cathedral. The Mass was being aired with subtitles in different languages. And just a few steps away, there were armed guards in front of, and huge security in front of the administrative building. And that was really confusing to me. And also when I got back to my hotel and sent emails to friends and family about my experience, I didn't mention armed guards, I just mentioned the Mass. And none of those emails were received by any of my friends or family.
Wow.
So they were very much being censored. And that was in 2008, just 2 weeks before welcoming many Americans to the Olympics. So thank you for helping me understand that it's a very complicated relationship to this day.
It is. It is a very complicated relationship, and you know, I often get asked a question. I'm just finishing a book actually by the same title as the exhibit I did, called The Samurai and the Cross: Reinventing Christianity in Pre-Modern Japan. And I'm often, when I give talks like this, I'm often asked the following question. Well, why are there, you know, relatively speaking, so few Catholics in Japan still today? You know, there are 450,000 Catholics and about another 500, 600,000 Protestants. So we have about 1 million out of 123 million. But we have over 1,000 Catholic schools. You ask people whether they're sympathetic to Christianity, and you'll get, in the tens of millions, you'll get people saying yes. But why are there still so few baptized Christians? And you know, the other day I was thinking about it, and I really do think it has something to do with this very long persecution. And a persecution where basically my good new friends, the Tokugawas, you know, they created this mentality that very effectively, that Christianity is suspect, that it is an evil religion, it's an evil teaching, it's a teaching that will destroy our society, that will destroy the very fabric of who we are. And you know, when you say that long enough and often enough, there's always, even if, you know, we're in 21st century, but there can always be a lingering, you know, we're not really sure what this stuff is. And you know, that's not true of many people, but this idea of, well, we're going to all become Christians, it worries some people. It says, well, this is not in our tradition. It's not part of who we are. And to which I object, and I say, you know, the greatest number of martyrs in Japan were not the foreign missionaries. It was ordinary Japanese lay people. It was the ordinary Japanese lay people, beginning with those 17 on the cross in 1597 and those 3 children. And it was the lay people during the 250 years of persecution. And they maintained the faith. And you know, when someone sometimes will object and say, well, Christianity is not really Japanese, you know, it's a foreign thing. Well, your people died for this. So, and I don't think people, you know, they were all given a chance. It wasn't like in Japan, you know, in Japan, it wasn't, they round you up and they kill you and you have no say. No, you always were given the chance to apostatize, to abandon your faith. And so many said, no, I will not. And, you know, going back to that question about silence, where they used these sacred images on which you had to step. You had to step on that. You know, one last thing I'm going to show you. Just bear with me 1 minute. I bought this on auction in Japan. It's a doormat. And on this doormat, I don't know whether can you see it?
Bring it a little closer to the camera. There, oh, close. I can't see it quite yet.
Okay,
Oh.
let me,
Now I can.
yeah, let me get it. Let me get it to show. Let's see whether we can get this. I think it's reflecting.
I'm laughing because I'm a teacher and I'm having the same Zoom issues.
Yeah. Anyway, what this doormat shows is an image of the cross, and it's made so that you can put it in front of your door and step on the cross every time you walk into your house. You know, which is a blasphemous sign of apostasy. And they thought that selling something, you know, like this would be kind of a cute thing to have. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make sure that no one else buys this. I'm going to buy it. And, you know, now it's a teaching tool. And I had to buy it on auction, like on the Japanese eBay. But the explanation of it was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. It says, use this mat the way our ancestors stepped on this symbol of the barbarians who, you know, were trying to take over our country. So, you know, obviously somebody used this as an opportunity to do something very anti-Christian. So much so that I've never seen anything like it. And, you know, 99.9% of Japanese would be just totally embarrassed by that. But it was interesting. What's interesting is that the persecution has left still that bitter drop, you know, of uncertainty about Christianity. And I think everywhere where that happens, you know, you have that. So
I would also say, though, when I went to India, I was invited into both Buddhist and Hindu services, religious services. That same year, we went to India for 2 weeks with some teachers. We were visiting Woodstock School in the Missouri, in the hill station of Missouri. And there were so many elements and structures of the liturgies, Christian, Hindu, and Buddhist at that time that were so in common. And I don't know if I missed in the first 15 minutes the real connections between Buddhism and Christianity and the stories of Thomas, our apostle, going to Asia. If you made that connection, and maybe I need to watch the beginning of this.
No, I didn't have that much time to really talk about Buddhism, except to say that, again, we're starting this amazing really dialogue with Buddhist monks and Shinto priests. And over the last 3 years, I've had a chance now to meet some of the really top monks, and many of them have never met a Catholic priest, or because many of them don't speak English, they've never been able to really engage. And so, you know, they were so happy to be able to engage with me. And I have a particular friend who knows them all. So particularly in Kyoto, the ancient capital, we've been going to all these different temples and meeting with them. And they are really, I feel that it's a special moment, a kairos, because they really want to dialogue with us. And, you know, I remember that these new Buddhist monk friends, they were begging me, and I didn't have them, but they were begging me for tickets to go to the papal mass, you know, in Tokyo. And many of them were there. So there's something, you know, out of all difficult situations, many good things come. I mean, who could have ever thought that I would become a friend of Mr. Tokugawa? You know, and I remember, this is awful, but I'm going to say it, and it's being recorded, but anyway, when he walked into the Jesuit community, you know, for the first time here at USF at Loyola House, And by this point, we had already met several times, so we had become more familiar with each other and more friendly. I thought, well, you know, this is my chance to take just a little bit of sweet revenge for 250 years of persecution. So I said to him as he walked into the house, I said, don't worry, you don't have to trample anything. So, you know, I'm not going to put the crest of your family on the floor and force you to step on it. Actually, I put the crest of the Society of Jesus and the crest of the Tokugawa family on the table. And, you know, it's a moment of meeting. And I find is deeply symbolic. You know, when he represents our persecutors and, you know, we represent the missionaries, and there comes a moment of reconciliation when Dr. Nagai Takashi, who wrote The Bells of Nagasaki, says, I'm not angry at the American soldiers who dropped the bomb on us. I'm grateful that the Nagasaki Christians, by having their cathedral explode one more time, and he uses the word Holocaust in the biblical sense, we are that burnt offering. And may this bring peace, and may it bring reconciliation, and may this experience of the cross help us to become friends. And you know, now 70 years later, the United States and the US are, you know, allies, and they are friends, and many things have changed. So I think, you know, that theme of reconciliation is an important one. It's one with, you know, whether it's China or the US and the many racial tensions now in this country, or whether it's the history of Christianity, whether it's Christianity in China, reconciliation is what we have to work for. That's why I find these themes meaningful to talk about.
Okay, can I ask you a question? And this is a question. Put yourself in the shoes of the Tokugawas when they decided to persecute Christianity. And I can think of a number of reasons why they might have done it, but I'd be interested in your opinion. What is it that drove them to do that?
Well, as I say, I'm just finishing to write a book on this topic. And so I've got all of this information in my head, so I don't know whether I'll be able to answer it, but I'll answer it very simply. I perfectly understand why they did it. Basically, you have them unifying Japan, and I see them saying very clearly, there can be no religion, there can be no faith, there can be no thought system which interferes with our government. And, you know, the problem with Christianity was we were saying there is a higher power, there is a higher authority beyond any human being. It's the authority of your conscience informed by the Holy Spirit. That didn't work for the Tokugawa. For the Tokugawa, this was a military government. I give you an order, you obey the order. One last thing about that I can say is, during the first shogun's time, Ieyasu, it was reported to him that a number of Christians whom he had ordered killed were being adored, or not adored, venerated by people who were present at the martyrdom. So others who came, Christians, who witnessed their martyrdom. And, you know, people were taking relics, and people were you know, soaking their handkerchiefs in their blood. And he was enraged. He said, the shogun has deemed them to be criminals of the realm. How dare anyone venerate those whom I have designated as criminals? And so it really was considered, I mean, it was reason of state. If this is allowed, if we don't have complete obedience, our entire system will collapse. And, you know, that was something that of course, Christianity, with this idea of a higher authority, it clashed ideologically. They couldn't accept it. In a way, it was an inevitable conflict, I think. So I have really put myself in the Tokugawa shoes many times trying to figure this out. And that's what I think happened. Yeah.
It's almost 12:30, and I
Well,
think
I
that this
managed
is
to engage you.
fantastic. Thank you so much for staying with us. I think we should probably close here and keep the audience wanting more. Maybe in the spring we can get you back again, or we look forward to hearing more, because this has been fascinating and really a wonderful opportunity. So thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. And we'll be in touch then.
Great. And what we usually do to close is if you could put us on gallery view, or take off the,
Yeah.
I guess as everybody puts themselves on gallery view, and if you're willing to turn on your screen for a moment, we love that, because it's so nice to see our fellow parishioners and friends around the world who are joining us at Hospitality and at St. Ignatius, our community here. And we will close by saying the Our Father together. When our tradition here is to turn our microphones on and allow the cacophony of Zoom to happen, kind of is our Tower of Babel moment. And just reach out our hand and say the Our Father together.
Our Father.
Our Father,
Our
who
Father,
art
who
in
art
heaven,
in heaven,
hallowed
thy name,
kingdom,
thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread,
bread.
Forgive us our trespasses,
as we forgive
we
those
forgive
who
those
trespass
trespass
against
against
us.
us. And lead us not
And lead us not into temptation,
into
but deliver us
deliver us
from
from
evil.
evil.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
Father Fuller, and
Thank
for
you,
everyone who
everybody.
joined us this week.
Bye,
I
everybody.
hope I
Thank
get
you,
to
Father.
meet you in the flesh.
Yeah. Thanks, Father Antoni.
Thank you, Lisa. Wow, it's great to see you.
Good to see you. Bye, Sister T.
Bye, Sister. Yeah, Sister Mary Moses. Nice to see you. Okay, goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye. It was a wonderful talk. Thank you.
No, thank you. And thank you, Lucy, for letting me keep going.
Yes.
Oh, it was a treat. I'm really glad we were able to do it. The fact that the Laudate Si is on another channel is great.
We also learned something new, that when you meet the Pope now, you shake hands. No more kissing the ring.
I tried, but he wouldn't let me.
Good. Good. That's
He
wonderful.
wouldn't let me. I tried it. I didn't do it in Tokyo. That was the second time I met him, because I tried in Nagasaki and he pulled his hand away. So.
Ah, that's wonderful. Good.
Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you so much.
Bye.